In today's lesson, we'll be focusing further on the differences between formal, semi-formal and informal letters. Now, I'm sure you'll remember previously I said the letters are either formal or informal. Well, that's not completely the case. Now that we're working through the course, we'll go a bit deeper. And there's actually three possible types of letters in terms of our language and tone. So when we talk about these types, formal, semi-formal, informal, we're talking about the tone and levels of politeness used within our language. Now, yes, letters can either be formal or informal, or they can also sit somewhere in the middle. So really there are three possible tones that we can use when approaching our Task 1 letter question. Formal, to a person we don't know, using a respectful, polite tone throughout. It's important to note that I say throughout because you don't want to mix tones. You don't want to start off very formal and then by the end turn into informal. That will actually make you lose marks in task achievement because you're not using a consistent tone. So you need to stick to either formal, semi-formal or informal. We'll look at different types of language you can use for each. So formal is the top level of politeness. Semi-formal, a person you might know, but only a little. So it's not someone that you were really close to. And it's really a balanced mix of being polite, but also not overly stuffy. That's quite a British expression. Stuffy, meaning too polite and awkward. So yes, semi-formal, somewhere in the middle. And of course, informal, a person you're very familiar with, probably very friendly with. You can use a more relaxed tone throughout. Again, stick to one of the tones. So when we work further through this course, we'll use either formal, semi-formal or informal language, depending on the question. Okay, let's take a look at three different questions now. Your distant cousin has written to you, seeking guidance on whether to take a gap year before starting university. A gap year is when somebody takes a year, especially in the UK, before attending university to travel. You believe taking a gap year is a good idea. Write a letter to your cousin in your letter. Highlight potential benefits of the gap year, explain why immediate enrolment in university might not be the best choice, suggest possible activities or experiences during the gap year. This might be one of the first questions that you've really taken a look at, and they always look like this. You have your first paragraph, which sets up the scenario, and then really the questions for Task 1 are great because it basically tells you what to write with each of the bullet points. Okay, so let's take a look at another question. Your best friend has sent you a message asking for advice on whether to buy a new car or continue using public transportation. You think buying a car is the better option. Write a message to your friend. In your message, share your thoughts on the limitations of public transportation, explain the advantages of owning a car, recommend specific car models or features to consider. Not very environmentally friendly, this approach, but okay. So, first question to a distant cousin, second question to a friend. I'm starting to think about what tone I might use for each of these questions. Let's take a look at another question and then we'll try and work out what tone is best for each question. You receive an email from a colleague in another department seeking your advice on whether to attend a professional development seminar, or focus on immediate work responsibilities. You believe prioritizing work is essential. Write an email to your colleague. In your email, explain the potential drawbacks, emphasize the importance of meeting current work demands, suggest alternative ways for professional growth within the workplace. Okay, first question, distant cousin. Second question, a letter to a friend. Third question, an email from a colleague in another department asking for professional work advice. Okay. You can pause the video if you like, or try and just, with me now, what tone would you use for each of the questions? Now, I'll sort of give you a hint here. We can join up each of the questions to one tone only. So they're not all formal, they're not all informal. We have one example of formal, one example of semi-formal, one example of informal. And what do you think that might be? If you want to pause the video and have another read through now, you can. But I will share the answers with you now. Here we go. So let's start with formal. An email from a colleague, professional work advice, formal tone. Semi-formal, a distant cousin. Doesn't sound like you know them really well. So you're probably going to be pretty polite, but not too relaxed. And informal, your best friend. You're going to be more relaxed in your language, more informal, more colloquial, more use of contractions, because you're talking to your best friend. Okay, so that just shows you quickly, and of course we'll practice this more, how we can think about picking our tone dependent on the question and scenario. So let's take a look at some of these different scenarios that we might have to answer. And we can think of them really as the purpose of the letter. So the tone is who we're writing to. The purpose is why. Complaining is often seen as a scenario. Complaining about a product, service, or similar. Requesting information or clarification on something, about a range of topics really. Applying for a job or similar. Inviting a person to attend an event or something scheduled in the future. Expressing gratitude and thanks for a gift, favour or similar situation. Apologising for a mistake or inconvenience. Explaining information about something. And lastly, seeking or giving advice on a matter. This is pretty close to a sort of really good overview of all the different purposes, but you don't particularly need to memorize this, but what I want you to understand is that really there's a range of different purposes that the letter will ask for us to write for. So here you have a good idea: complaining, requesting, applying to something, giving thanks, providing information. These really are the main sort of purposes of the letter. Now, for each purpose, we can use any of the tones. It very much depends on who we are writing to. For example, complaining about a product or service, if we're writing to the CEO of Microsoft, it will be very formal. Whereas if we're complaining about a product or service, maybe to our parents, will be informal. So for each of these purposes, we can use a range of tones. But really, depending on who we write to, we'll pick the tone. And then the purpose of the letter is one of these scenarios here. Once you've practiced a couple of these, you'll feel really confident with it. Okay, so that is a rundown of the differences between formalities of our letter and also a quick overview of some of the reasons that we'll be asked to write our letter to.